Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim. This is another Real Ideal Gear Review, and today we're looking at one of my favorite watches of all time. It's a legendary watch. It's not a Casio. It is a Seiko, and it is the Arnie. So it's a watch that I was a kid. I just remember looking at this watch and thinking, this is the watch that I absolutely want. It has the digital display. It has the analog. It has the cool screw-down pushers on there. It's black and silver, has some polish on it. It was such a cool looking watch. It is still a cool looking watch, and it has all of the digital things that you want: stopwatch, alarm, all that stuff. So you get the best of both worlds, as it's one of the first hybrid watches out there. I think it was the first hybrid digital analog watch that was out there. This watch is also ISO certified, so if you're into scuba diving, this watch is certified by ISO ratings, so you can wear that if that's one of the requirements for scuba diving. So this is a great watch. A lot of great things about it. However, at the end of the video, there's some disappointing news about this watch that I'm going to share with you, and it may or may not affect whether or not I recommend this watch overall. I'm not going to give it a score because this watch is on loan to me from Paul Whaley, and here it is. And Paul, thank you very much for loaning to me one of my favorite watches of all time as far as design goes, looks, feels, and matter of fact, when it says Arnie on it, I just feel like I'm curling 200-pound dumbbells, but in reality, I don't. So let's go through the typical things we go through. We're not going to rate this watch like we typically do, or that I typically do. So we're going to go through this watch and just kind of talk about it and give some general ideas. And the watch comes to me being used, so it's not in the new condition. So therefore, I can't go through and talk about, just the quality of manufacture and those kind of things. But we'll talk about the size. It is a 47.8 millimeter by 13.75 millimeter. So the chunkiness factor on this is a 3.5. It's actually really good. When you look at the proportions of this watch, I really like the proportions of the watch. It doesn't look too chunky. It has a big enough case on it where it spreads out the height off the wrist, which is a fairly tall watch off the wrist. But remember, this is an ISO certified dive watch. So when the pushers are screwed down, it's a 200 meter water resistance rating. And for those of you into scuba diving, this is going to qualify as one of those dive watches that you can wear scuba diving. So great overall proportions. I love the look at it. The crown for setting the time is great. The screw down pushers, as far as grippiness goes, they're just the right size, and they're just sticking out just far enough where I can grab on and get some good purchase on those screw down pushers. So really overall, I love the size of the crown. I love the size of the watch, the proportions, great overall size. Weight wise, it's a little heavier watch, but it's also a quartz analog watch, and so you get kind of the best of both worlds. It has kind of that Seiko tuna look to it, and man, just a great looking watch. Now, what about the fitment of this watch? Now, Paul sent it to me with an FKM tropical strap on here, which I love. It has all kinds of adjustments on here, so easy to fit. And when it comes to the bracelet, I'm not as much of a bracelet fan as I once was, unless it has the adjustable on-the-fly clasp on there, then it's awesome. But other than that, I do like the straps, and this really looks good. So I have to say, Paul, this watch with this strap looks really cool. Now, what about the finish of this watch? You have a dull matte black finish on the side case. You have kind of a polished bezel, and the bezel itself is really hard to kind of get a good grip on. There's not a lot of good texturing on the bezel. So for me, I'm not a huge fan of the grip or the texturing on the bezel. The action on the bezel, I like it. I like the action on it. The bezel doesn't quite line up. It's just a little bit off, kind of a typical Seiko thing. Overall, I love the look of it. On the inside, on the dial, on the analog side, I love the handset in there. The hour hand and the minute hand are great. They're differentiated enough in shape so that you can see the difference between the two. But what I always look at with this watch is the second hand. And let me know if you have one of these watches or if you've looked at this watch before, but the delicate nature of the second hand is incredible. It's so different. When I look at this, it's like, man, I really like the second hand on this. This is something I never noticed before when I was looking at this watch as a kid, or even now in the past few years when I've been doing these watch reviews. I think the second hand is really what sets off the whole handset. You have these kind of heavy-duty hour hand, minute hand, and then the very delicate second hand. Just a great look to it. The hour markers are great. The 12, 3, 6, and 9 are perfect. They're all differentiated from each other, so you can tell which one is which. And very easy to read, very legible watch. The Loom on this watch is good. I like the Loom on this watch. It lights up pretty quick. It also has a light on here that lights up the digital display, which does a very effective job of lighting up the digital display. But let's talk about the digital display for a second. It's too small. Now, okay, so I knew this going into this, and Paul and I, we talked about this. He said, Tim, I think I know exactly what you're going to say about this. And he's 100% right. I'm not a fan of the digital display. If there's going to be a digital display on an analog watch, it needs to be useful. If it's not useful, like on the Casio, it's too small. This is in the same category. The digital display is almost useless on this watch. This is really an analog watch. So if you're going to use the digital components of this watch, the stopwatch or an alarm or the day date, which the day date is maybe okay. Now I have glasses, reading glasses, so that's one of the biggest reasons why I don't like the digital display, because it's too small. For those of you that don't have reading glasses, maybe this is just fine. But I'm just not a fan of the size of the digital display. Now, to get a bigger digital display on here, you probably have to compress a lot more things in here. The analog display is going to take a hit as a result. So it's probably overall just not going to work in the engineering and design piece overall. But the digital display to me just does not work. But remember, this is the Arnie. So don't argue too much with the Arnie, or this watch will beat you up. Okay. Now, the history of this watch, I have to share a little bit, because this history is going to come back when we get to the final comments of this watch. When Paul received this watch, he had some issues with the watch going to a factory reset when the watch was brought out into the sunlight. This is a solar watch. It's a solar quartz. So it has a 6-month power reserve on here, and you just charge it up by sitting in the window or wearing it all day, and the solar radiation is going to charge the battery on here. But when he was exposing it to sunlight, it would go through a factory reset. And I think he had it sent back to the factory twice, if not 3 times, for sure twice, to have this fixed. And the 3rd time is the charm, or the 4th time, whichever it was, is the charm. It now works. I've actually worn it outside in the sun, and yeah, it does not go back to a factory reset. So that was a problem on his initial purchase. I just wanted to point that out. When we get to the end of the recommendations here, we'll talk about that one more time. Accuracy of this watch, typical quartz accuracy. It's going to be an accurate watch. And also keep in mind, it has a 6-month power reserve on here. So if you have this thing fully charged, you can expect to have this watch last at least 5 months, 4.5 to 5 months on that power reserve. Sometimes 6 months. I don't really trust those ratings that watch companies put out, and kind of back off maybe about 10%, 15% off of the overall length. So if it says 6 months, I'm thinking to myself 4.5 to 5 months as far as a power reserve goes. Now, as legibility and light and loom goes, because it has light and it has loom, and the legibility on the analog side is phenomenal. I love it. I can see, without my reading glasses on, I can see the 12, 3, 6, and 9. Those are all differentiated. I can see the hour hand and the minute hand differentiated from each other. And even the second hand, there's just enough there where I can see it moving around the dial. Now, what about the light on here? The Loom's awesome. Overall, it's great. The ISO rating on this is 200 meters of water resistance, so no issues with water resistance at all. Make sure that you have the screw-down pushers screwed down so that you don't have any water incursion into the case of the watch. Now, what about the overall recommendations for this watch? Well, first of all, it's the Arnie. Legendary. Like, if you're going to get this watch, one of the primary reasons you're getting this watch is because it's the Arnie. So yeah, this is already going to be a watch that I would recommend for that reason alone. So if you want to get a watch that was in Hollywood, if you want to get a watch that's ISO certified, that's going to give you a great analog readout as far as the time is concerned. Also has the dive bezel, the one-way dive bezel. It works. So all of those functional pieces for a dive watch are great. It's the digital side to me that just doesn't cut it. It's just too small. It works. Stopwatch, alarm, all that stuff is on there. Day date. It's great. But for me, with the reading issues, the reading glasses that I need, it just doesn't work for me. One other positive about this watch, the MSRP in this watch is $525. I checked it out on Amazon. You can get this for $369. Not a bad purchase for a watch that has legendary Hollywood status. And he wore this in more than one movie. He wore it in Predator, and I think he wore it in Raw Deal. But Predator is one of the greatest Arnie movies of all time, along with the, The Last Action Hero, I think was another great one that I liked a lot. So, yeah, you're going to get a watch that has Hollywood fingerprints all over it when it comes to the DNA and the history behind it. What do I not like about this watch? Obviously, the digital display is just too small. The bezel's hard to grip. It's a little too slippery. The purchase on here is just, there's not enough fine grippiness material to it, or grippy texturing to it, unlike what they have on the crown for the setting the time, which is fantastic. So again, just kind of missed the boat on that one. If they could have increased the grippiness of that, I think it would have been even better. Also, one other thing I want to mention, and this is not something I've heard of on other reviews, but because the digital display is at the top of the analog dial, and you're holding your wrist in sunlight, you're going to get shade off of the top side of the bezel onto the digital display, which makes it even harder to read in that high contrast light. So for me, I would prefer to have the digital display at the bottom of the dial. That way I don't get that same shadow effect, because when I'm rolling my wrist up to check the time, I don't get that shadow off the top portion of the bezel that typically happens. There's a model out there, the SNJ025, where they swap the digital display to the bottom. So I would actually recommend that version of it for that reason alone. If you have a compulsion to get this watch because you do like the digital display, I'd make sure I get the one where it has the digital display towards the bottom, because you don't have the shade being cast onto it. So overall, what do I recommend this watch as a watch to wear? For me, no, I would not buy this watch. The digital display just kind of crash and burns this watch for me. I love the analog piece, but you know what? There's a lot of great analog watches out there that don't get crammed by an ineffective digital display. Now, would I buy this watch because of the legendary status? 100%. $369 on Amazon is totally worth it for a legendary watch that looks cool. It's quartz, it's solar, great grab and go kind of a watch. You have all the functions on here, and if I take the time to put on my reading glasses, the digital display is just fine. So yeah, I could go that route if I really wanted to. But if I'm looking at just pure horological qualities of the watch, I don't think so. But if I'm looking for the legendary status, it's a definite yes. Yeah, it's coming to pick me up. I have to get to the chopper right now. So put your comments down below before the chopper comes and picks me up. Let me know what you think of the Seiko Arnie. And I highly recommend it if you're looking for the legendary status. Check it out.